The Mando takes us back to town because he is back in business.
How you get so big getting food of this kind?
Hello and welcome to this week's spoiler review of The Mandalorian Chapter 5, The Gunslinger. So please be warned, there will be spoilers following this point for this episode. Overall, I thought this was a solid episode. I thought this to me was what the show was going to be before we all knew about Baby Yoda. This is a bounty of the week kind of episode. This is a bounty hunter on the trail of a bounty doing bounty hunter things. This was kind of a return to what the show was going to be. In some ways, as much as I adore Baby Yoda, as much as I adore Yodel, as much as he is my son, I do think he's probably a little bit of a divergent trip from what the show is overall going to be, because at the end of the day, this is called The Mandalorian. I do think we're going to see him continuing to do bounty hunter things. I think that the fact that we go from an episode like last week where he was given the opportunity to join a community, it only makes sense to then go to this episode to see him kind of back to doing what he's always done. Now, part of the motivation for this is he is still on the run. The episode opens up, we're already in the middle of a fight. There are bounty hunters still on his tail, presumably for Yodel. He says, if you give me the kid, maybe I'll let you live. The way this episode opens, this episode felt very much like a typical, almost like Die Hardian kind of action movie. Up until this point, everything we've seen has been either very Western or very Western infused with samurai, and it's kind of followed this, yes, action-adventure quest-like paradigm, but from an almost mythical, archetypal sense. This episode to me felt far more like more modern action show, and is very much more what I was expecting the show to be. Now, because Yodel is my son, my enjoyment of these episodes is a direct correlation and causation to exactly how many memes of Yodel I can make when the episode is done. But I don't really think that's the show's fault. At this point, I pretty much want The Rise of Skywalker to just be 2.5 hours of Yodel. I'm a little bit biased there. But in and of itself, other than the lack of memeable Yoda moments, I really don't have any problem with the story. I think this is exactly what the show was kind of promised to be, and in fact, I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of this. Granted, it's only the 5th episode, and the first episode was very much like this, and so it's, you know, I guess that's really approximately 50%, so maybe it's not that strange that we haven't seen that much of something like this, but I do think it's important and good to see the Mandalorian in his element, doing what he does, because we do have to understand that he's a bounty hunter, and he needs funds. He's got to feed little Yodel, he's got to repair his ship, he needs money to do that. You know, he's not going to barge into a hangar and hold a poor soul at gunpoint and make them repair it. He wants to pay his way, so this is how he pays his way. The other thing this episode does that's really important, and something that I wouldn't recommend overlooking, is between the start and the end, we see that still the Mandalorian has to be on the run. Like, we start out the episode and he is under fire. By the end of the episode, everything is turned on his head because Fennec has convinced Toro that he needs to go after the Mandalorian. And so, yes, there's still a bounty on Yodel, but there's also, presumably, if not a bounty, at least an interest on the Mandalorian himself, and that they're both kind of enemies of different characters in the show. Mando of the Guild and Yodel of the Empire. In this story, you don't really want to go from, oh, I'm in danger, to the danger, right? You want something that kind of builds up the tension, gives you this sense of how word travels. It also tells you a lot about Fennec's character, that she is somebody who, even though she's not in the Bounty Hunters Guild, right? She's called an assassin and not a bounty hunter. Even though she's somebody who's been on the run, she still knows what's up. She's still tapped into everything that's going on. That could be a testament to her own skill. It could be a testament to how well known it is that Mando is in trouble. It could be a testament to both. It also just reinforces the point of how weird it is to see another Mandalorian, and the fact that he's walking around in that armor at all calls attention to him. So it's subtle what this episode is doing. It does feel, like I said, like a hunt of a week. Like if you compare it to an X-Files Monster of the Week episode versus, you know, big chasing the smoking man kind of story. that's the difference here, but it is still laying seeds for what's going on in the overall universe within the context of the show. That Mando really can't rest, especially to go to a planet like Tatooine, which would be in an influx of crime after the fall of both the Hutts in Return of the Jedi and the Empire. The other kind of trail of character that we see in this episode is Mando trying to learn how to be a dad. I heard some critique that of the last episode that he openly took Yodel with him into like the cantina on the one planet, on the sanctuary planet. That didn't bother me when I watched it. It didn't really occur to me. Like, we were told that it was a backwater world, and I didn't think he should just leave him alone on the ship. Like, I didn't know what he was supposed to do. I also understand, especially when you get to a planet like Tatooine, you don't want to bring the child out into the open because somebody will see him and somebody will recognize him. So now what he's done on his ship, we see he's built him kind of a new seat, a new child seat, now that he no longer has the pod. When they land, he's able to get the child to go to sleep, and then he kind of shuts him into this closet that he's almost turned into a bedroom. I think there's a subtle note to their bond, because the Yodel is awake when they're in space and they go to land, unless a lot of time has passed, and I just don't necessarily understand that. But Yodel is awake and then asleep when the Mando tries to tuck him away. And then Peli, the mechanic lady, is like, do you know how long it took me to get him to sleep? Now, maybe he just had a good nap. But I think there's a sign there, too, that he really has bonded with Mando and feels comfortable around Mando. I also kind of wonder how he got out of their room. Is he smart enough to know how to push a button? Would that closet even have buttons on the inside? Or is this kid maybe, like, using the Force a little bit off-screen? I do think that us seeing him use the Force again is going to be a payoff more towards the end of the season at this point. I think if he used it too much now, it would detract from the specialness of that. As much as I want to see him use the Force, as a viewer, as somebody who kind of critiquing the story, I don't want to see that. I want that to be a payoff. I want that to be something we've earned. At first, when we saw it as early as the second episode, I was kind of worried, but really I think that was a specific moment under adrenaline that we saw to just establish that, and because it was a fight or flight adrenaline type moment, much like Leia in space in The Last Jedi, I think there's a point where when you know your life or the life of somebody you care about is in dire need, instinct takes over and you can really use the Force, and maybe Yodel doesn't use it a whole lot. Or maybe he uses it all the time and that's how he got out of the closet. We don't really know. Either way, I don't think that's something we're going to see on screen again for a while. I think it could be a sort of save the day moment again, but in the final episode, and that way it will still feel special and it'll still feel earned. And I'm pretty confident in that because there's several points where he could have used the Force by now if they'd wanted to. Last episode when he almost got shot, this episode when he almost got shot. I know, I keep seeing on Twitter, people are like, oh my gosh, I panicked when that happened. Even though I'm obsessed with Yodel, I haven't really been afraid that he's gonna die. Like, after the first episode where they have the fake out and I thought IG-11 shot him, from this point on, I really don't think they're gonna kill him. If they did, and that's a giant Criffin if, it would probably again be in the final episode. They're not going to do it in episode 5 or 6, so I haven't really been concerned about it at this point. But it's like, man, how many times is he going to almost get shot? But that was a total tangent, I'm sorry. But to get back on topic, I do like that we see the Mandalorian is trying to learn. We see him learning that he shouldn't just take the kid out into the open, in the same way we saw in 3 when he turned him in and 4 at the sanctuary. But even then, he still doesn't really know what to do. And like, I like that Pele is like, you can't just leave a kid on a ship. But even then, when she's holding Yodel, like, she's like playing with his ears and stuff, and she's not necessarily being gentle either. So I like the idea that she might not even really know how to take care of kids, but she knows more than Mando. And to kind of see that juxtaposition. In this episode, we find ourselves on a familiar world. We find ourselves back on Tatooine. It's kind of a relief to be on Tatooine. I feel like the Disney era has kind of been the era of planets that aren't Tatooine, but you think they are. Like, we had that with Jakku with Force Awakens, we had that with Pisana in Rise of Skywalker, we had that with the planet of Navarro, I guess it's called, in this show. But now, this time, the new desert world that we're on is actually the desert world we've always known, which is Tatooine. And there's a lot of really cool iconography in the episode. We see the cantina. Toro, the new guy, is sitting in a booth, if not the booth where Han was sitting, very nearby, but it has that imagery. The droid bartender is at least the same model as the type of droid that was in Jabba's palace. We see a droid that's at least the same model as R5-D4 from A New Hope. So there's a lot of little references. You know, we see banthas, we see dewbacks, we see Tusken Raiders. So there's all of this like really cool Tatooine specific stuff that really kind of harkens back on those nostalgia muscles. And so that was just fun atmosphere. I mean, if you're going to go on Tatooine, you should really embrace being on Tatooine. I like that this is the planet that has the Imperial heads on stakes. It's kind of a statement, I think, that there really isn't a strong Imperial presence on that planet. If there was, they certainly would have gone after whoever put those stakes up and had taken them down, so that's a good setup. I'd kind of wondered if maybe Moff Gideon, that we know is in the cast, was going to show up here, but as soon as I saw that this was the episode with the staked helmets like we saw in the trailer, I didn't think so, because I didn't think he'd let that stand. The new character of Toro, the bounty hunter who's kind of in over his head, as the episode description said, is a hotshot character. He's a good balance of somebody who is very confident of himself, but the fact that he's asking for help at all shows how much he does actually need that help. I liked that he was intelligent. Like, he has some amount of savviness. He knows to bust the fob so that, you know, he doesn't want to make it easy for the Mando to trick him or betray him. But at the same time, he's not really super savvy. He's not that, like, street knowledgeable, maybe more than street smart. You know, he doesn't understand what a Mandalorian is, what Beskar armor is. He doesn't have any sense that the Mando is somebody on the run from the guild when he's asking for somebody's help to get him in the guild. He's not worried about the money, he's just worried about getting in the guild. I mean, he's a bounty hunter, so, you know, he's got questionable morals anyway. He has some street smarts, but he's also clearly young and inexperienced, even to the point where he's able to go after willing to go after somebody like Fennec, who presumably has a lot of bounty hunters on her tail. He's going for something big. He probably doesn't need to go after her to get in the guild, but we see that he wants to be legendary. In fact, that's probably something that Fennec picks up on when she's like, oh, your name will be legendary, and she's trying to convince him to go after Mando and leave her alone. I think that she probably is aware, because he tells her, hey, you know, you're my ticket into the guild. That's probably a little clue to her, like, oh, this kid is so green. This is a kid who didn't want to just kind of get into the guild. He wanted to make a statement when he got into the guild, and that's how she knew he was somebody she could manipulate. If he had not said that line at all, you know, she might not have known that turning him against Mando would work, because for all she knew, they were friends and not newly acquainted people. Honestly, as action-packed as this episode is, and as much as there are some cute scenes with Yodel, I think my favorite scene is the part with the Tusken Raiders, how you start looking out far away, and then they show up close, which is exactly the same tactic we see in A New Hope. So we see that is kind of their play, that they announce themselves far away so that you look there while they really just show up. It's almost like the Velociraptor trick from the first Jurassic Park movie. They're a bunch of clever girls. What I like about Mando here is this is an episode, like I said, that is much more that pulp action story. I mean, even Mando's like, that's my catchphrase thing at the beginning. Like, that opening scene made me feel like this is something that's like Space Die Hard. It's this corny, over the top, purely for the fun and for the lulz kind of action, which isn't a bad thing. It's just the tone that it was going for. But Mando can still be that hero, that protagonist might be a better word. He can still be that protagonist in that kind of story, but then he has the sense to, when they're on Tatooine, Toro's like, you know, the locals think they're scum or whatever, and he's like, well, the Tuskens think they're the locals. You know, he has that cultural sensitivity, and then when the Tuskens show up, rather than going right to shooting, you know, he does signs to communicate with them, to negotiate passage through their lands, and respects that a desert wasteland is their land. You know, it'd be so easy for somebody else to go, no one would want this land, so it wouldn't belong to anyone, so I can just cross it. Where he's like, no, I know this is theirs, and we need to just work up a trade, and they'll leave us alone. You know, he's not I'm gonna just bust into the desert, fight every Tusken Raider I find. He's a guy who's just like, I'll give you a pair of binoculars and then you can leave me alone. And I like that even though we get this pulp action story, he's still the smarter person that we got to know. But he's the kind of guy that can just go, you know, I'm just going to deal with the Tuskens rather than I'm going to count on my fighting skills. And I like seeing that kind of more thinking Mando more as we go through the show. Here we find out that Fennec is also very smart. She knows she has multiple bounty hunters on her tail, and she leaves one dead, and uses him as bait to lure out the other bounty hunters, which is how she gets a drop on them. In fact, they would be dead if it weren't for the fact that Mando has Beskar armor. And I think that's why Mando was the one who wanted to go out and see. If the guy was still alive, he probably knew that if there was a sniper, his armor would protect him, where the kid didn't. The other thing I like going on here is you can see that Mando is kind of a natural teacher. He's kind of it's almost like wherever he goes, he finds somebody that he wants to interact with in some way, I suppose. But with Toro, he is kind of helping him. He, when they get to the dewback, he's like, tell me what you see. He's explaining everything they're doing and why, when he doesn't really need to do that. But he's also not really coddling the kid. The kid's like, I don't wear Beskar, and Mando's just like, nope. He's not gonna play nice with it either. But I like seeing their dynamic, even though it ultimately didn't go his way. And I think, again, Mando probably saw that coming, but was just using the opportunity that he had. I like that they had a tricky plan to get up to Fennec. I like that it almost worked and didn't. I like that Toro fought her and was holding his own enough to at least not die, but she still beat him handily. The only reason why it was a struggle at all is because he started with the drop on her. But then, she just gives up or the fight anyway, when Mando shows up, although I think she's still kind of in control of that situation. I don't think she's ever out of control. I think she knows that one of the bikes is destroyed and that she can probably use this to her advantage. Again, I think a weakness here with Mando, I think he's the type of guy that will just do a thing. Like, if this were a group project in school, he would be the guy that would just end up doing the whole project while no one else did anything because someone needs to do it. Because the smarter thing would be to send the kid to go get the dewback, because leaving him with Fennec, she completely manipulates Toro. And that's something that just wouldn't have happened to Mando, and he could have been worried about things that she might say to him. But I think rather than get in an argument about who goes gets the dewback, he's like, I'll just get the job done. Like, the kid can sit here and point a blaster at her. One line I found intriguing is he said, don't let her get near the bike. She's no good to us dead. So clearly her bounty isn't a dead or alive type of thing. I don't know if that was just a shout out to some lines Boba Fett had referring to Han Solo and Empire, or if that was just to tell us something, but it does seem to be like she has an alive-only bounty, which is interesting. So then Mando goes to get the dewback, comes back. At this point, Fennec has talked Toro into betraying Mando, and he shoots her. Now, at the end of the episode, I don't think she's dead, and maybe she had some kind of armor herself that he might not have known about, even though she is clearly knocked out, so who's to say? At that point, when Mando comes back on the dewback, he doesn't get down to check to see if she's really dead. He kind of buys it wholesale. I don't know if that's because he really does buy it, or if because he realizes that if Fennec isn't there and didn't take the body, then that must mean he is now turning against Mando and has gone back to the ship. And in fact, we see him go immediately back to the hangar, so he knows what's up at this point. And I bring that up because then we get to the end of the episode, and the question is, what happens at the end? So I don't think Fennec is dead. I don't think she's dead in the slightest. She was too BA the whole episode to just go down in a pot shot. It looked more like he was shooting her in the leg anyway. The figure that walks up to her has like this spur sound when he walks. It's this kind of cowboy sound, which is really interesting. That to me makes me think that it's a brand new character. I don't think we've heard anybody that makes that sound when they walk. I think it's important that we didn't see that character's face at the same time. I think it was very distinctive and very intentional that it cut away before we could really see anything identifying of that person. And also cut away as that person's clearly going to check Fennec's pulse, and we don't see the result of that. If she was dead, I think they would show us she's dead. I don't see the point of leaving her status ambiguous, only for it to be, nope, never mind, she's really dead there. That doesn't make a whole lot of story sense. So I think there's two things going on there. That this is somebody new to the show, at least. Who this person is important, and would probably be recognizably important if we saw them, and whether or not Fennec is alive. Now, there is a couple of theories as to who it could be. One that's interesting is there's a character by the name of Cobb from the Aftermath trilogy. If you read those books with us on the channel, you might remember. He is a person who's not a Mandalorian, but acquires some Mandalorian armor, and is kind of the sheriff on different parts of Tatooine. So because he's described as the sheriff, the spur sound is possible. It just depends whether or not this show wants to draw material from those books or not. It could. It absolutely could, but we just don't know. If they're pulling a character from lore that we've seen before, that would be my best guess. I don't know that they are actually going to pull a character from lore. It's certainly not unreasonable. At the same time, I don't know that I'm waiting expectantly for it either. I think it's kind of equal parts possible, impossible, depending on what they want to do. But if they're pulling somebody from lore, that's a good idea. It's just that not only is that referencing something that happened in a book, but it's something that happened in a book that came out in 2015, and something that happened in a book that came out in 2015 in like a small interlude segment and not like the actual plot of the book. So it would be kind of a deep cut, about as deep of a cut as you can get in current canon. You can cut a little bit deeper if you go back to Legends. I think it's possible, but I'm not exactly betting money on it either. Like I said, overall, I like this episode. If I had a complaint, it is only that there is no, like, really cute standout Baby Yoda moment. There's several parts where Yodel makes a cute face or makes a cute sound or what have you. He's certainly in the episode. It was just not an episode that was centric around him, which is fine. Like, that would be my only true complaint, but it's a really biased complaint because I have a very specific reason why I've become so obsessed with this show. It's not really the show's fault, and it's perfectly understandable that they will want to do some things that are not solely on Baby Yoda. And it, you know, him looking for money, him needing to repair a ship, him saying that he still needs to be on the run, setting up an adversary in Fennec that will presumably carry on. These are all important things. So I think it was a solid episode, even if it's not as memeable of an episode, which is fine. But I want to know what you guys thought of the episode. Let me know in the comments. If you're not already, follow us on all socials. And until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun!